The roar of engines that never started, the glint of aircraft that never flew. These were the sensations that greeted Japanese reconnaissance pilots soaring above the Pacific Islands during World War II's most desperate hours. What they witnessed below were masterpieces of military deception, elaborate fake military installations, meticulously crafted from humble materials like plywood, canvas, and palm fronds. This ingenious stratagem, frequently overlooked in the grand sweep of Pacific War narratives, emerged as a silent architect of Allied victory. It brilliantly diverted critical Japanese intelligence resources and strike capabilities, showcasing an unsung chapter of tactical brilliance that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the Pacific campaign. We are unearthing this audacious deception, discovering how low-tech illusion transformed into high-impact warfare, concealing genuine operational sites and shifting the balance of power in the skies above the world's largest ocean. In the opening stages of the Pacific War, the situation confronting Allied forces was nothing short of catastrophic. Following the swift, devastating expansion of the Empire of Japan across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Basin, the vast oceanic battleground was initially dominated by the sheer scale and sophistication of Japanese air and naval power. From late 1941 through 1942, the Japanese military machine operated with alarming efficiency, establishing a formidable ring of island bases that stretched across the South Pacific and appeared nearly impregnable. A critical component of this early dominance was their highly effective and relentless intelligence gathering apparatus. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft, often flying unmolested through skies where Allied fighter coverage remained thin, served as the eyes of their military machine. These observation planes meticulously charted Allied troop movements, located supply depots, and most crucially, pinpointed every operational airfield within their considerable range. These airfields represented the lifeblood of Allied air power, the essential bases from which crucial interceptors and bombers launched to contest Japanese control of the skies and seas. For Japanese strategists, destroying these bases on the ground presented a far more efficient and less costly approach than engaging in dangerous dogfights against determined opponents in the air. This harsh reality established a strategic vulnerability for Allied forces that demanded an immediate and innovative countermeasure. Every operational base was a target. Every piece of accurate intelligence gathered by enemy reconnaissance threatened to erase vital assets and personnel in sudden, devastating attacks. The constant threat of enemy air raids targeting known airfields meant that protecting real assets became the single most critical yet seemingly impossible defensive task facing Allied commanders. The Allies needed to find a way to make their actual bases invisible, or better yet, to confuse the enemy into striking at ghosts. The urgency was palpable. In theaters like the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, the difference between victory and defeat often hinged on which side could sustain air operations over extended periods. With limited resources and the constant pressure of enemy attacks, simply building more real airfields was not a sustainable option. Construction took time, materials, and labor, all resources in desperately short supply. A new radical form of counterintelligence was required, a strategy that didn't rely on superior firepower or vast industrial resources, but on pure deception and the exploitation of the enemy's own assumptions and observation patterns. This desperate need for effective counterintelligence gave birth to the audacious idea of the dummy airfield. It was a solution born of absolute necessity, leveraging low-tech creativity to fight a high-stakes war, aiming to turn the Japanese military's intelligence dominance into its greatest strategic weakness. The concept was simple in its genius, yet remarkably complex in its execution. The goal, to construct entirely fake operational airfields, convincing enough to fool high-flying Japanese reconnaissance pilots and the intelligence analysts who interpreted their photographs. These were the dummy airfields, and their introduction marked a paradigm shift in Allied tactical thinking. But what exactly comprised these dummy airfields? And who conceived this audacious approach to defensive warfare? While camouflage and battlefield deception have existed for centuries across countless conflicts, the scale and meticulous detail applied in the Pacific theater were truly revolutionary. It was a strategy largely born from the collaborative efforts of forward-deployed Allied engineers and experienced airmen who understood precisely what operational signs an enemy pilot or intelligence officer would look for when assessing potential targets. They understood that a convincing fake base needed far more than just a cleared strip of land masquerading as a runway. It needed the activity, the infrastructure, and the visual signatures of a genuine, functioning military installation. The deception went far beyond merely grading a strip of jungle or beach to resemble an airstrip. Beyond the plywood and canvas foundations, the intricate details incorporated into these phantom installations were genuinely astonishing. These sites were often constructed adjacent to or in strategically distracting locations near real airfields, creating layers of uncertainty for enemy planners. Every aspect of operational airfield life was carefully simulated. Fake runways were professionally graded and deliberately covered with dust to mimic the traffic patterns of heavy aircraft use. Dummy aircraft, often life-sized replicas of Allied fighters and bombers like the P-40 Warhawk or the B-17 Flying Fortress, were painstakingly crafted by skilled carpenters and technicians. These were not hastily assembled theatrical props. They were built with incredible attention to authentic detail, painted with accurate national insignia and unit markings, and artificially weathered to appear genuinely operational rather than freshly constructed. They were often mounted on movable skids or platforms, so they could be shifted daily to simulate the movement of real aircraft being towed in and out of revetments for maintenance or mission preparation. Further enhancing the convincing nature of the illusion were the dummy support structures essential to any functioning airbase. Fake hangars and fuel depots were constructed using local materials combined with camouflage netting to create the proper silhouettes and shadows. Roads leading to the dummy base were deliberately driven upon by vehicles to create realistic tire tracks and dust patterns. Even dummy anti-aircraft gun positions, often fabricated from cleverly arranged logs, barrels, and painted wooden shapes, were included to suggest a defended high-value target worthy of serious attack. Sometimes smoke generators would be employed to simulate the dust clouds and engine exhaust of a busy air operation, creating thermal and visual signatures that would register on observation from altitude. The true genius of the dummy airfield lay in its perfect imperfection. Allied planners understood that a perfectly neat, spotless base would look suspicious to experienced reconnaissance observers. Instead, they incorporated simulated signs of wear and tear, fake bomb craters, patched up runway sections, and strategically scattered equipment to make the site appear like a recently used, high-priority target that had already weathered minor enemy attacks and continued functioning despite damage. Rare archival footage and surviving historical photographs showcasing the construction and appearance of these dummy sites reveal the extraordinary commitment and craftsmanship of the engineers and labor corps who built them. Their work represented an unsung form of industrial art, transforming simple, available materials into convincing tactical illusions capable of fooling professional military observers. It was this level of authentic detail that made the critical difference, ensuring that when Japanese pilots flew overhead at thousands of feet, they saw not an obvious collection of props, but a high-value, tempting target deserving of their limited and precious ordnance. The dummy airfields were fundamentally an exercise in sophisticated psychological warfare. a brilliant, low-cost strategy designed to manipulate the enemy's critical resource allocation and intelligence priorities at the highest levels. The goal was not simply to hide real assets from detection. It was to actively entice the enemy to waste their most valuable and irreplaceable assets, their limited reconnaissance flight time, their precious aviation fuel stocks, and their restricted supply of bombs and munitions on attacking installations of absolutely no military value. The Japanese intelligence system, though dominant and effective early in the war, was psychologically prone to believing what it expected to see. The confirmed presence of a seemingly operational Allied base, complete with visible aircraft, fuel dumps, hangars, and defensive positions, presented an irresistible target to commanders under pressure to demonstrate results. By presenting these phantom bases for enemy consideration, Allied strategists brilliantly forced the Japanese high command to make critical and ultimately costly decisions. Either allocate scarce resources to destroy the apparent dummy base, or risk allowing a significant operational threat to remain active in their rear areas. In the fog of war, where incomplete information was the norm and the consequences of error could be catastrophic, the risk calculation almost always favored striking the perceived threat rather than assuming it was a deception. The psychological pressure to act proved overwhelming. Specific instances of this deception successfully drawing Japanese attention and resources are numerous throughout the Pacific campaigns, though often relegated to anecdotal accounts from unit histories and veteran memoirs rather than celebrated in official histories. One of the most famous and well-documented examples occurred during the campaign for the Russell Islands, a critical staging area located near Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands chain. When Japanese intelligence detected the rapid buildup of Allied forces in preparation for upcoming offensive operations, they began frequent and aggressive reconnaissance flights over the area. Allied forces, anticipating this surveillance, constructed elaborate dummy bases, complete with over a dozen full-sized replica aircraft, positioned in locations that were easily observable from standard reconnaissance altitudes, but tactically useless for actual military operations. When Japanese strike aircraft arrived to disrupt the Allied buildup, they followed their intelligence briefings and pre-mission targeting data, expending their full bomb loads and ammunition on the fake strips and the wooden planes scattered across them. The real, crucial Allied airfields, located just a short distance away, where actual fighter and bomber operations continued without interruption, went completely untouched by the enemy attack. These strikes, carefully documented by Allied observers on the ground, represented a staggering testament to the deception's effectiveness in real operational conditions. Each bomb dropped on plywood and canvas was a bomb not dropped on a real runway, hangar, fuel depot, or, most importantly, on the personnel who maintained and operated them. The unseen impact of this successful misdirection was profound and directly contributed to key Allied victories in the campaign. By systematically diverting strike aircraft and tying up valuable reconnaissance assets on phantom targets, the dummy airfield program saved countless Allied lives and conserved desperately needed material resources. They bought precious time for real bases to be completed, for vital supplies to be unloaded from vulnerable transport ships, and for real operational aircraft to prepare for their missions without the disruption of enemy attack. The cumulative effect of these repeated tactical victories, the continuous wasting of Japanese ordnance on worthless targets, and the resulting exhaustion and demoralization of their air crews flying dangerous missions against fake installations, was a slow but steady degradation of the enemy's overall operational capability across the theater. This psychological manipulation represented a strategic masterstroke. It sowed seeds of doubt throughout the enemy's intelligence chain, forcing them to double-check every sighting and gradually eroding their confidence in their own reconnaissance capabilities. The growing fear of striking another dummy target and thus wasting irreplaceable resources forced increasing delays in Japanese decision-making, giving the Allies a priceless operational advantage in the timing of their movements and attacks. The dummy airfield, therefore, was not merely a physical decoy or defensive camouflage. It was a powerful psychological weapon that attacked the very mind of the enemy commander, creating hesitation and uncertainty where decisive action was required. The construction of the dummy airfields was a massive logistical undertaking, requiring an unusual and creative blend of military discipline, engineering, ingenuity, and artistic talent. The unsung heroes of this entire operation were not the fighter aces in the cockpits or the admirals commanding fleets, but the engineers, the carpenters, the labor battalions, and, in many cases, actual artists and set designers recruited specifically for their ability to create convincing three-dimensional illusions under challenging field conditions. The engineers formed the organizational backbone, devising quick modular construction methods for the replica aircraft and support structures that could be adapted to local material availability. They often used nothing more than readily available local timber, fabric, and ingenuity to create structures that would withstand weather and observation while remaining cheap enough to sacrifice. The artists and camouflage experts were tasked with the meticulous detailing that would make or break the deception, the painting of the dummy planes to mimic realistic light and shadow patterns from various angles and altitudes, the artificial weathering of surfaces to suggest age and use, and the overall arrangement of the base components to look functional and authentically active from thousands of feet above. This work required a keen understanding of aerial perspective, photography, and the way that altitude and atmospheric conditions altered visual appearance. Colors that looked correct from ground level might appear completely wrong from a reconnaissance plane. Shadows that seemed natural to an earthbound observer might reveal artificial construction to an experienced aerial observer. The military strategists, meanwhile, worked closely with intelligence officers to determine the most effective placement locations, positions that were sufficiently visible to attract enemy attention, but strategically irrelevant if actually attacked, often located along the known flight paths that Japanese reconnaissance aircraft were confirmed to use regularly. Geographically, the dummy airfields proved a crucial component of the island-hopping campaign that gradually pushed Allied forces across the Pacific toward Japan. While the tactic was employed across nearly every theater of operations, certain locations stand out where the deception was absolutely critical to operational success. Guadalcanal and the surrounding Solomon Islands, the site of the first major Allied offensive land operation against Japanese-held territory, was one such place where dummy airfields played a decisive role. The defense of Henderson Field, the real, vital Allied airstrip that enabled continued operations and resupply, was paramount to the entire campaign's success. Dummy strips constructed in the surrounding area helped draw Japanese bombing attacks away from this crucial facility, safeguarding the actual air operations that ultimately made the Guadalcanal victory possible and marked the turning point of Japanese expansion. Similarly, the islands and dense jungles of New Guinea served as prime staging grounds for these elaborate illusions. As Allied forces pushed westward along the northern coast, establishing forward operating bases to support the advance, dummy airfields were constantly being built, maintained, and dismantled as the front moved. They served as vital protective shields for the real bases supplying the offensive push toward the major Japanese stronghold of Rabaul, forcing the enemy to guess which installations were genuine and which were traps. The operational tempo was extraordinarily high. As soon as one deception had been exploited or the tactical situation shifted, another was put in place, often using the same materials and crews relocated to new positions. The scale of the operation was enormous by any measure, while exact figures remain impossible to confirm due to the inherently secret nature of the covert operation and the inevitable destruction of the fakes by enemy attack or Allied demolition when no longer needed. Historians estimate that hundreds of dummy aircraft and dozens of complete dummy airfields were constructed throughout the Pacific Theater from late 1942 through 1944. Their collective strategic significance cannot be overstated in the overall Allied victory. They were not merely localized tactical diversions or temporary defensive measures. They were an integral, planned component of the overarching Allied strategy to achieve and maintain air superiority across vast distances. Every time Japanese commanders committed resources to attacking a ghost target, it slowed their response time to real threats, increased their operational losses through wasted effort, and accelerated the exhaustion of their finite war machine. The cumulative effect of these silent wooden warriors was a continuous, subtle bleed on the Japanese war effort, allowing real Allied power to build, consolidate, and eventually overwhelm the enemy through superior logistics and sustainable operations. The story of the dummy airfields stands as a powerful example of how ingenuity and low-tech creativity can triumph over superior material resources and industrial capacity. This incredible deception, a collective effort of engineers, strategists, artists, and laborers, laid critical groundwork for the future development of military camouflage and misdirection tactics that continue to influence warfare today. The principles refined in the Pacific Theater, understanding the enemy's observation patterns and psychological expectations, simulating realistic operational signatures at multiple levels, and leveraging the human tendency to see what they expect to find, became standard operating procedure in later conflicts. These concepts were integral to the planning of the massive deception operations leading up to the Normandy landings in Europe, where they reached their most elaborate expression. The construction of dummy ports, fake army convoys, and even entire phantom armies, such as those deployed by the famous Ghost Army in Europe, all owe a direct tactical debt to the pioneers who first perfected large-scale simulation of military assets in the challenging conditions of the South Pacific. The fundamental idea that a fake installation could be just as strategically valuable as a real one, simply by virtue of drawing enemy fire, wasting enemy resources, and creating uncertainty, permanently altered the doctrine of military deception in Western military thought. Yet despite its profound impact on the Pacific War and its lasting influence on military science, this incredible story remains largely unknown and unsung in popular history and public memory. There are several interconnected reasons for this deliberate historical silence. Firstly, the inherent nature of intelligence and deception operations means they are often classified at the highest levels and deliberately downplayed by the militaries that employ them, preventing the full story from emerging until decades after the events, when most participants have passed from the scene. The very effectiveness of such operations depends on secrecy, and that secrecy often persists long after operational necessity has ended. Secondly, historical narratives, whether in academic texts, popular histories, or entertainment media, often favor the heroism of direct combat, the dramatic dogfights between individual pilots, the desperate infantry charges, the massive bombardments and naval battles. A victory won by plywood, canvas, and clever deception lacks the immediate dramatic appeal of a pitched battle between determined opponents, making it a difficult story to center in a war film or conventional history book. Thirdly, and perhaps most ironically, the very success of the deception meant that the Japanese rarely realized they were hitting fake targets rather than real ones. This meant there were few spectacular, verifiable accounts of their failure to circulate and capture public imagination. There were no surrender ceremonies at dummy airfields, no captured enemy commanders admitting they had been fooled. The victory was silent, subtle, and cumulative, difficult to dramatize or celebrate in conventional terms. However, the legacy of these lies is a powerful and enduring one. It teaches us that warfare is not only a contest of firepower, industrial capacity, or numerical superiority, but also a competition of wits, imagination, and psychological resilience. The construction of the dummy airfields in the Pacific was an act of profound strategic intelligence, a testament to the fact that when faced with overwhelming odds and material inferiority, human creativity and understanding of human nature can serve as the ultimate force multiplier. The heroes behind this deception, the men who built the planes that never flew, the runways that never launched a single sortie, the fuel depots that held no fuel, deserve recognition for their crucial role in turning the tide of the Pacific War through brains rather than bullets. Their story serves as a powerful call to action to explore the deeper, often overlooked currents of military history, encouraging us all to acknowledge the unsung heroes and the ingenious tactics that prove the greatest weapon on any battlefield is often the human mind itself. The ghosts of the Pacific, the phantom runways that existed only in enemy intelligence reports, the dummy fighters that never fired a shot, the installations that cost nothing to build but everything for the enemy to attack, remain a monument to the power of illusion and a profound lesson in the true art of war.